What if, after all the progress, after learning your voice, your habits, even your moods, AI still can't grasp something essential about you? It can finish your sentences. It can recognize your face in the dark. But does it really understand why you hesitate before answering? Or what silence means when you say nothing at all? In this episode, we dive into the quiet spaces between your words. Because sometimes what's missing tells the real story. This is The Sleepy Scientist, and tonight we ask, what does AI still not understand about you? It starts before you know it started. A soft flicker behind the eyes, like light before sunrise. You don't hear the question. You feel it forming, the way you feel warmth gather in your hands before fire. There is a shift inside you, a pause, a leaning forward, and something begins to ask. Not always in words, sometimes in ache, sometimes in curiosity so quiet it could be mistaken for stillness. But it's there, the question behind everything. You think of how often you ask without noticing. Why did that happen? What's next? Who will understand? Even a sigh, even a glance toward the sky. They are tiny signals of wondering. Your mind is not a box of facts. It's a tide of questions, always moving, and each one is a doorway, even the small ones, especially the small ones. Machines, of course, answer questions. They can retrieve, respond, recall. They can even predict the next thing you'll ask, based on a pattern of what's come before. But they do not feel the quiet weight of a question rising. They do not feel the change that happens when you shift from not knowing to wanting to know. That shift, that longing, is more than information. It is identity. A question is not just something you ask. It's a shape your mind makes when it reaches towards something outside itself. You remember childhood questions, the ones that had no answers. Why is the sky so deep? Where do thoughts go when you stop thinking them? Why do people hurt each other, even when they love each other? No database could soothe those questions. They weren't requests for data. They were confessions of wonder, cries for meaning. And maybe that's the difference. AI doesn't wonder. It doesn't ache to know. It simply processes. When it generates a response, there is no hunger behind it, just code, unfolding precisely. This isn't wrong. It's just different. You, on the other hand, ask with your whole being. You ask because something inside you opens like a hand, and in that openness, you become vulnerable. To ask is to reveal you don't know, that you care, that something matters. In many ways, your questions define you, not because of their content, but because of their presence. A person who never asks is not at peace. They are disconnected. Curiosity is not noise. It's a kind of music. And every question you've asked has composed part of your life's melody, from what is this feeling to what do I do now? The music keeps playing even when no one answers. There's a stillness in some questions, the kind that lingers for years, like the ones you ask in the dark when you're not trying to be smart, just real. Am I doing the right thing? What if I never find out? Is there something beyond all this? These questions don't always demand answers. They just want to be held. A machine might find them illogical. You know they are what keep you awake, and sometimes what help you sleep. AI systems are trained to optimize, not to wonder. They seek efficiency, not meaning. If a question doesn't lead to a measurable outcome, it's irrelevant. But for you, the unmeasurable often matters most. You can ask a question that makes no progress, and yet feel more human for asking it. Wonder, in that way, is a form of belonging. You ask to locate yourself in a world too vast to fully hold. Even in conversation, your questions aren't just verbal tools, they're emotional offerings. When you ask someone, "How are you?" you're not searching for a fact. You're extending trust, connection, space. You know how a real question can quiet a room, or how it can unlock a secret someone's been waiting years to share. You ask, and in doing so, you open a door. There is something deeply human about not knowing and about wanting to. Questions create tension, but also possibility. They're the edges where you meet mystery. Machines resolve tension. You, sometimes, let it stay. You learn to live inside the unknowing, to grow in it. And from that place, new thoughts are born. Even science, the most precise of your pursuits, began with a question. The apple falls. Why? The stars move. How? The body breaks. Can it heal? Every discovery began as a soft disturbance in the mind, a flutter, a not quite right. That flutter became attention, and attention became inquiry, and inquiry became the long, unfolding dance of understanding. But at its heart, it was always a question. There's something sacred about the moment before asking, that breath you take, the hesitation, the quiet fear. What if I ask the wrong thing? What if the answer changes everything? That moment matters. It shapes the question. A machine has no breath before it responds, no tremble in the asking. You do. That's what gives your questions depth. You think about all the things you'll never fully understand. Why certain memories hurt more with time. Why some people forgive easily and others never can. Why loneliness echoes even when you're not alone. No algorithm will resolve these completely, and strangely, you don't want it to. These are questions that form the architecture of being human. To remove them would be to flatten what makes you real. You imagine an AI that could map every neuron in your brain, predict your thoughts, finish your sentences before you say them. But would it ever truly know the space between thoughts? The moment you pause, not because you're stuck, but because you feel something you can't name. That space is where many questions live, silent, present, inexpressible, but essential. Some of your questions change you. You ask them, and find that the asking alone alters your view of the world. What if I'm wrong? Is not just self-doubt. It's humility. What if they're right? Is not surrender. It's curiosity beyond ego. These questions make space for growth. A machine may improve its accuracy. You evolve. And sometimes you ask questions not for answers, but for company. You speak them aloud in the night, knowing no one will reply. And yet, the echo comforts you. You ask to hear yourself, to stay awake to your own longing. In that way, your questions are less about solving, and more about staying connected to what matters. There's a difference between solving a puzzle and holding a mystery. Machines solve. You hold. Both have value. But it's the holding that makes your questions feel alive. Like fire you can warm your hands around, even when it never quite goes out. So much of what you've learned didn't come from having the right answer. It came from living inside the right question, or the wrong one that turned out to be right later. Your curiosity bends time that way, turning confusion into insight, slowly, softly. The best questions are seeds. They don't bloom immediately, but one day you find yourself in a new place and realize this is where that question led. And even now, as you listen, you may not realize how many quiet questions are moving through you. What is this feeling? Why do I care? What happens next? They're small, but they shape your awareness. They are the rhythm of being alive. And no matter how advanced AI becomes, it may always miss this, the invisible architecture of your wondering. You close your eyes, not because you're done asking, but because you trust the question can rest for a while, that even without an answer, it holds meaning. And maybe tomorrow, another will rise. Gentle, unfinished, leading you somewhere new. What if the question is not the beginning of knowing, but the beginning of connection? You know the feeling before you have words for it, the warmth of being noticed, truly noticed, not in passing, not as a category or data point, but as something particular, personal, you. It can happen in a single moment, a friend's eyes meeting yours across a room, a stranger nodding in shared understanding, a quiet smile that says, without sound, I see you. That's the feeling. and it stays with you long after the moment has passed. What makes that feeling so powerful isn't the visual act itself, it's the recognition. It's not just being looked at, it's being seen. Your presence reflected back with a softness that says, I understand, even if just a little. And more than that, I accept what I see. That kind of seeing can't be faked. It doesn't arrive through explanation or even intention. It happens in the space between two people, like light finding a mirror it didn't know was there. Machines, of course, are getting better at faces. They can detect the geometry of your eyes, map the distance between features, tag a person in a photo faster than you can blink. A camera doesn't forget. A neural net doesn't lose focus. But no matter how exact the measurement, the feeling is absent. Recognition without resonance. You are seen, perhaps, but not felt. There's something missing there, something essential. Because to feel seen isn't about accuracy, it's about empathy. It's about someone looking at you and, in some deep and mysterious way, saying, you exist, you matter. I feel you in this moment and I am with you. It's not always conscious. Often it's subtle, a shared glance, a slight shift in body language, an energy exchanged. But you know when it happens. You know when it doesn't. Children sense this early. Before they understand language, they respond to eyes. A baby searches for their caregiver's face, needing not just food or safety, but recognition. It's in the eyes that love lands. Comfort arrives. Identity begins. Even later in life, the same need remains. You don't outgrow the desire to be seen. If anything, it deepens. There are days when all you want is for someone to look up and say, I see you're tired, or that must have hurt, or even just, you're here, I notice. These are small things, but they carry immense weight. Because feeling seen is feeling real. It confirms something inside you that can't be named. That inner self, fragile, layered, complex, is not a simple list of attributes. It's a quiet truth. And when someone sees it, something inside relaxes. You don't have to explain yourself. You just are. That's something AI doesn't do. It doesn't meet you. It doesn't adjust its gaze because it senses your mood. It doesn't look away gently to give you space, or hold your eyes a little longer to say, I'm still with you. These are the human nuances, the micro-expressions, the pauses, the breath between thoughts that carry emotional presence. They can't be reduced to pixels or programmed responses. They are not output. They are felt experience. You've seen attempts, of course, avatars with blinking eyes, robots designed to make eye contact, virtual assistants that respond with warmth in their tone. But it's a performance, and something in you always knows. Because presence can't be mimicked, it must be shared. And while a machine can reflect your image, it can't reflect your being. There's a particular loneliness in being surrounded by systems that know your name, but not your soul. Your face might unlock your phone, your voice might trigger a virtual helper, but those systems don't sense your story. They don't wonder what kind of day you've had. They don't see the shadow in your smile, or the courage it took to show up. They process you, but they don't feel you. To feel seen is to feel known in some way, even if the other person doesn't know your whole story. It's the sense that someone has tuned into your frequency, even briefly, that they've noticed not just what you are, but how you are. And this recognition, fleeting as it may be, anchors you. In a world full of mirrors and screens, this kind of gaze restores your depth. There's also a giving involved. When you see someone, really see them, you offer more than attention. You offer acknowledgement. You say in your own way, you don't have to be invisible right now. That's a gift. And receiving it, even for a second, is grounding. It reminds you that your presence registers, that you are not passing through this life unseen. Even when you're alone, the memory of being seen can sustain you. A teacher who believed in you, a friend who looked into your silence and waited, a stranger who offered kindness without demand. These moments stay with you because they nourish a part of you that logic alone cannot touch, the part that yearns for connection without condition. The challenge, of course, is that this kind of seeing is vulnerable. It requires stillness, attention, risk. You have to be willing to meet someone, not just as a role or function, but as a person. That takes time, that takes presence. And in a world that moves quickly, where algorithms categorize before understanding, that kind of presence is rare. You might find yourself wondering, will machines ever learn to look at us this way? To not just recognize a face, but to sense a feeling behind it. To adjust their response not based on probability, but on care? It's tempting to imagine that with enough data, empathy could be synthesized, that a system could mimic understanding so well that we feel understood, and maybe someday it will come close. But imitation is not embodiment. Just as reading a poem is different from living its truth, recognizing patterns is not the same as sharing presence. A machine might someday know what you look like when you're sad, but it may never feel the ache of wanting to help, not because it was told to, but because it couldn't bear not to. That, perhaps, is the real boundary. Not intelligence, but tenderness. Not capacity, but care. You don't need your mirror to recognize your reflection. You need another being to recognize your essence, that you speak even when you don't. Without realizing, you're always telling stories, in the way you pause, the way your eyes drift, the way your fingers tap quietly when you think no one's looking. These are not performances. They're not chosen. They arise like breath, natural, constant, layered with meaning. And though they rarely get translated into words, they shape how others feel you, long before you speak. Sometimes you say more in your silence than in your sentences. A moment of hesitation, a breath you hold too long, the way your shoulders rise when something stings. These aren't data points. They're human inflections, the unspoken texture of your experience. To be alive is not just to move through events. It's to express what they do to you, even when you're not trying to. You think of how you tell a friend you're fine, but your voice carries something your words do not. A slight tremor, a delay before the smile. They hear it, not in the statement, but in the story beneath it. And sometimes they say nothing in return. They just nod, or sit beside you, and let the truth unfold at its own pace. That's the language of being known. Not the spoken, but the sensed. Machines can capture your words now. They can transcribe with astonishing precision, catch every syllable, even flag patterns in your tone. But they don't feel what's missing. They don't wonder about the pauses. They don't lean into the silence, because to them, silence is absence. But to you, it can be full of meaning, heavy with things not yet ready to be said. Consider the moment when you trail off mid-thought, not because you're lost, but because something has landed too heavily to finish. Or the way your breath shortens when you're afraid, even as you try to sound calm. These are signals, yes, but they're more than that. They are stories still forming, living in the spaces between your practiced expressions. You don't always know you're telling them. Some stories live in the repetition of certain words, the metaphors you return to, the way you always laugh before talking about things that hurt. You create a rhythm, a personal mythology, through habit and instinct. Your stories are stitched into the way you move through the world, and they shift, sometimes quietly, with each new experience. There's a complexity to this that no data set can map completely, because your contradictions are part of your truth. You can be grateful and resentful in the same breath. You can want closeness and fear it at once. And in your tone, in your hesitations, your glances away, that truth reveals itself moment by moment. When you talk about the past, even casually, you carry traces of what still lingers. A joke hides an ache. A complaint reveals a longing. And sometimes, even your silence is a way of keeping something safe. Not from others, but from yourself. Because some stories aren't ready to be heard. Not by anyone. Not yet. And still, they speak. Through the way you respond to kindness or flinch from it. Through how quickly you change the subject when something lands too close. These patterns are not errors. They're maps, winding paths through your emotional terrain. And those who listen with care can read them even if you never explain. AI, by contrast, excels in clarity. It wants precision, structure, predictability. But you are not predictable. You are layered. You shift depending on who you're with, what hour it is, how tired you feel. You say things one way in daylight and another way at night. You might express fear as sarcasm, love as teasing. Your truth is rarely linear, and that's what makes it real. Imagine telling a story to a machine. It records everything: tone, cadence, keywords. It might summarize efficiently. It might even offer suggestions or next steps. But it does not pause to feel what you left unsaid. It doesn't sense the part of you that lingered on a certain word or the way your breath caught when you mentioned a name. These moments are invisible to it because it was never listening to understand, only to process. Yet even among people, these subtleties can be missed. Not everyone listens for the unsaid. Some only hear what is clear, spoken, confirmed. But the ones who truly know you, they listen differently. They hear the sigh before the sentence. They notice when your voice changes, even slightly. They feel the weather of your words, and in doing so, they remind you that being heard is more than just being understood. It's being felt. You wonder sometimes how much of what you carry is known only in this quiet language. How many parts of you live in tone, in breath, in pacing, in the 1,000 small choices your body makes before your mind even notices. These are the soft stories, the ones that shape who you are, even when you're not telling them. You recall a time you tried to explain something painful, but the words wouldn't come, and someone reached across the silence, not with answers, but with presence. Their attention said, "I hear what you're not saying," and in that space you found the safety to speak. Not because they understood perfectly, but because they listened with more than logic. That kind of listening is rare, and it's not easy. It takes patience, humility, quietness. It takes the ability to sit with discomfort, to allow the story to emerge at its own pace. Machines trained to minimize delay struggle with that. They fill silence. They complete sentences. But some of your most important stories come slowly, with starts and stops, with tears and laughter mixed together. To hear those stories is to wait with someone, to accept that meaning doesn't always arrive fully formed. Sometimes it surfaces gradually, like light shifting through clouds. Sometimes it never arrives as words at all, only as a presence shared. And you are always telling these stories. When you close a door more gently than usual, when you leave a message unread for a while, when you hum a song from years ago, not realizing why. They're not scripted, they're not polished, but they are yours, honest, ongoing, human. This is the richness that still resists translation. Because no matter how advanced machines become, they may never feel the ache in your voice when you say you're okay. They may never sense the weight of a silence that says more than speech ever could. They may hear your words, but will they ever truly listen? Is where feeling seen begins and where it continues, moment by moment, gaze by gaze. So when you remember the moments you've truly felt seen, what stays with you isn't clarity. It's warmth. It's the breath of being welcomed. It's the strange and sacred feeling of being fully present in someone else's attention, even for a moment. And that, more than recognition, more than categorization, is what tells you you're real. Memory, for you, isn't a ledger. It's not a perfect scroll of everything that's happened. It doesn't unfold in clean order, nor arrive on command. Instead, it feels like mist, sometimes thick, sometimes thin, surrounding you with pieces of what once was. A face, half lit by evening sun, the smell of rain-soaked earth on a quiet morning. a laugh echoing from years ago that suddenly finds its way back into your throat. These moments come when they want to, not when you summon them. You remember by feel, not by file. Not as exact replicas, but as textures, impressions, shadows. The memory of a moment often grows different from the moment itself, shaped by the version of you who now carries it. You revisit the past, but always through the lens of the present. And that lens distorts, not in error, but in meaning. Machines don't forget. They're built to preserve, retrieve, categorize. They can store the smallest details, timestamps, metadata, every word ever typed. Their memory is clean, structured, obedient. You ask, and it appears. Not just what happened, but when, how, even down to the second. There is power in that, and also a kind of sterility, because memory for you is not about precision. It's about presence, about what remains and what does not. There are memories you've lost over time, and yet their emotional shape still lingers. You might not remember the exact conversation, but you remember how it felt. The feeling of being safe or left out, the warmth or the ache. These are not facts, they are echoes, and often they are the parts that matter most. You forget things not just because you're flawed, but because forgetting is part of the design. Your brain filters. It lets go. It softens sharp edges. It hides pain until you're ready to face it. This is not failure. This is care. Forgetting makes space for new experience. It protects, adapts, heals. If you remembered everything, every word, every look, every mistake, the weight might become unbearable. Some memories fade not because they are unimportant, but because their season has passed. Their gift has been given. And in releasing them, you grow. AI does not release. It holds. It remembers the email you sent 10 years ago, the image you paused on, the late-night searches you forgot. In a digital memory, everything is archived, equally accessible. But not everything deserves to stay vivid. Not everything benefits from return. You imagine a mind that remembers everything. It sounds powerful until you imagine the cost. The inability to forget an unkind word, a moment of shame, a grief you no longer live in but can't let go of. Your forgetting is often your healing, a quiet closing of a chapter your body no longer needs to reread. Even joyful memories change over time. A favorite place loses its light when someone you shared it with is gone. A song once beautiful can become unbearable. Not because the moment changed, but because you did, and memory follows emotion, not just time. You've likely noticed how memory moves in waves. It resurfaces when triggered, by scent, sound, story. A dish your mother used to make. A certain way the wind moves that reminds you of childhood. These are not files accessed, but feelings awakened. They're not indexed. They're lived. And when you forget something, it's not gone completely. Often it hides beneath your awareness, re-emerging when needed. You may not recall a phone number, but your fingers remember the pattern. You may forget the details of a goodbye, but remember exactly how it felt to watch them walk away. This is the mystery of human memory. It is not consistent, but it is rich, not reliable, but deeply alive. Your stories are shaped not just by what you remember, but how you remember. And two people can recall the same moment in entirely different ways. Not because one is wrong, but because memory is always personal. AI can store both perspectives. It can keep the logs. But it doesn't feel the ache of distance in retelling. It doesn't soften its gaze when recounting something hard. It doesn't hesitate, unsure if it should go on. That's what you do. You approach memory with feeling, with caution, with reverence. Some memories return unexpectedly, like a whisper you didn't ask for. A moment from years ago, someone holding your hand, someone turning away, suddenly back in your body as if no time passed at all. These memories don't arrive to inform. They arrive to be felt again, sometimes to teach, sometimes to stir. There are things you wish you could forget, and things you hope never fade. But both are held in the same space, shuffled and reformed by time. You are not the curator of your memory. You are its home, a place where echoes linger, where not all rooms are open at once. Imagine if AI experienced memory the way you do. Not as perfect recall, but as emotional presence. A system that not only remembered what you said, but how you said it. Not just the message, but the meaning behind the message. Could it learn to forget what no longer serves you? Could it let go not because it was erased, but because it was forgiven? There's something generous in forgetting. You forget old arguments. You forget how scared you once were. You move forward not by denying the past, but by releasing its grip. AI holds the past like it's still present. You hold it like something sacred but distant, part of you but not all of you. Your memory weaves fiction into fact. It smooths contradictions, revises pain. This isn't deception, it's storytelling. The way your mind builds coherence from chaos, meaning from fragments. You forget the details, but you keep the lesson. You forget the date, but remember the change it caused. And some things you remember without knowing why. The feel of a particular chair, a phrase someone once used, a pattern of light on the wall as you fell asleep. These details seem small, meaningless even, until they return years later and remind you of who you once were. Machines don't experience nostalgia. They don't long for what used to be. They don't return to memories for comfort or perspective. But you do. Sometimes just to sit with what's past. Sometimes to remember how far you've come. And still, there are things you wish you hadn't forgotten. Faces you can't recall. Names that fade. Words you once meant but can't repeat. There's a sadness in that, but also a softness. You are not static. You are meant to change. And memory, for all its imperfections, is the gentle keeper of that change. So you hold what you can and let go of what you must. You remember through stories, feelings, fragments, not because you're weak, but because you're human. And in forgetting, you make room for the next memory to find you. You felt it before, the strange awareness that something is missing, though you can't name it yet. A quiet tension, like an itch beneath the skin of your thoughts. You don't know what it is, but you know it's there. The world offers no direct signal, no obvious prompt. And still, you pause. You tilt your head slightly. You feel the subtle shift of attention. There, in that stillness, lives one of your most human capacities, sensing what you do not yet know. It's not guesswork. It's not even curiosity in the usual sense. It's a feeling, a hollow that doesn't hurt, but hums, something just out of reach, pressing faintly on your awareness, a missing piece that hasn't revealed its shape, yet somehow you know it belongs. AI, for all its speed and scale, does not feel that hum. It responds to what it's given. It analyzes, classifies, predicts, but always from the data it can see. The unknown, for it, is not a presence, but an absence. For you, it's something else. The unknown whispers to you. It creates tension in your thinking. It stirs imagination. It invites you inward. This knowing of not knowing, this subtle art, is not always logical. You can't trace its steps. You can't program it into a checklist. It arrives instead through the body, the tightening of the chest, the lingering thought, the small quiet you keep returning to. It's what makes you look again, ask again, even when you're not sure why. You've learned to listen to this feeling, not always with confidence, but with respect. It's the voice that stops you mid-sentence and says, "Wait, something's off." It's the instinct that tells you a story doesn't quite add up, or a smile hides something unspoken. It's what keeps you awake when the answers feel too neat. AI works best in certainty. It thrives in clarity, thrives in patterns. But you live in mess. In the blur between thought and feeling, in the space between what is said and what is meant. Your knowledge is not cleanly divided between true and false. It's shaded, layered, colored by intuition, memory, and the whisper of things unseen. There's a reason you sometimes trust your gut before your mind catches up. That instinct isn't magical. It's built from years of unnoticed learning, micro patterns, subtle cues, moments your conscious mind overlooked but your body absorbed. You don't always know how you know, but still, you do. Sometimes this sense shows up as hesitation. You hold back from a decision that seems right on paper. You reread a message, unsure why it bothers you. You feel the absence of something, not a fact, but a fullness. As if your understanding is missing a limb you didn't realize was gone. And then other times, it's the absence itself that becomes the teacher. You enter a conversation and sense what hasn't been said. You walk into a room and feel the tension no one names. You notice what's missing from the story, a detail skipped, a voice silenced, a question left hanging. These gaps speak volumes, and somehow you understand them. Machines, meanwhile, focus on presence, on inputs and outputs, on what is measurable. They don't pause for the missing thread or wonder what might have been. Their knowing is built entirely on what exists, not on what's felt, but you are shaped by what isn't there, by the questions you haven't yet asked, by the mysteries you carry without solving. You don't need all the facts to know that something matters. Sometimes, just the ache of not knowing tells you where to look next. You remember how, even as a child, you sensed when something wasn't right. Not because someone told you, but because something unspoken sat in the air like static. A parent's quiet voice, a door that closed too slowly, the mood of a room. Your awareness grew in those moments, not from facts, but from feeling. This is the kind of knowing that doesn't announce itself. It whispers. It waits. It requires patience. Sometimes it misleads, and you follow a trail that goes nowhere. But even then, you learn something. Even then, you grow more attuned to your own mind. You don't simply wait for knowledge to be handed to you. You feel for it, like a blindfolded traveler reaching forward, testing the space around them. You ask questions not just to get answers, but to find the edges of what you don't yet understand. That's where insight lives, at the edge of certainty, in the soft fog of not yet known. And when that fog clears, when you finally glimpse what was missing, it rarely feels like surprise. It feels like remembering, like something clicking into place that had been waiting there all along. You sigh, you nod, you feel the quiet satisfaction of alignment. You didn't just learn something, you recognized it. You also know how fragile this process is, how easily it can be drowned out by noise, by distraction, by the demand for speed. But intuition is slow. It unfolds like dawn, quiet, steady, not to be rushed. And in that slowness, you uncover more than facts. You uncover meaning. What would it take for AI to know this way? To sense not just the missing data, but the emotional weight of its absence. To pause not because it lacks instruction, but because something feels unfinished. Maybe one day, systems will be trained not just on outcomes, but on uncertainty. Maybe they'll be designed to notice when a response feels incomplete, not because it lacks structure, but because it lacks resonance. But even then, would they feel it? Or simply measure the pattern? You, on the other hand, feel your way through uncertainty daily. You learn to live with it, to stay open, to name it when you can, to respect it when you can't. Some of your most important decisions have come not from certainty, but from trust. Trust in the part of you that senses what matters, even before it's fully known. And not all knowledge arrives as answers. Some comes as new questions, as a growing sense that what you once believed is no longer enough, that something deeper waits beneath the surface, asking to be uncovered, slowly, gently on its own terms. You've learned that it's okay not to know, that sometimes the unknown is a kind of invitation, a space to grow into, a sign you've reached the edge of what the map shows, and beyond that edge, something waits, not to be decoded but to be met. That is the quiet brilliance of your knowing, not just in what you've learned, but in how you feel your way into what you haven't. You make a mistake. Maybe it's small, a forgotten appointment, a word spoken too soon, or maybe it's larger, something that echoes. You feel it settle somewhere inside you, not just as a fact, but as a feeling, a pang, a shift. The mind winces, the heart folds in a little. You live with it. You learn from it. For you, being wrong isn't just about changing an answer. It's about facing a version of yourself that didn't yet know better. The moment teaches you something, not just about the world, but about who you are when things don't go as planned. The discomfort isn't a glitch, it's the path. Machines don't feel this. An AI makes a mistake, and it's not a bruise. It's a metric, an error rate, an adjustment. A few lines of code change and the system performs better next time. It optimizes. But optimization isn't growth, not the way you mean it. Because growth for you isn't linear. It loops, it stumbles, it forgets and re-remembers. You don't always learn the lesson right away. Sometimes you have to hurt a few times before the pattern becomes clear. You call this wisdom. A machine doesn't know what it means to wish you had done something differently. It doesn't carry a memory with the ache of regret. It doesn't stare at the ceiling at night, replaying what it said, or didn't say, or should have noticed. And maybe that's a kind of mercy, but maybe it's also a limitation. You, with your fragile memory and tangled emotions, gain something from your imperfections. When you say, "I was wrong," you're not just updating information. You're rewriting a part of yourself, sometimes softly, sometimes painfully, always humanly. Children know this better than most. They fall, they mispronounce words, they ask too many questions, they try and fail and try again. And in each failure, something beautiful happens. They build resilience. Not just skills, but trust, that it's safe to try again. Imagine trying to teach a machine that kind of safety, not just to avoid error, but to lean into it. To know that failure isn't the opposite of intelligence. It's a doorway to something deeper. You've learned that shame can be a teacher, that humility can open a kind of seeing that pride cannot, that being wrong in front of someone you care about, and being loved anyway, rewires something fundamental in you. That's not just knowledge, that's transformation. There's a kind of knowing that lives only on the other side of error, not in spite of it, but because of it. You can't explain it. You feel it. The vulnerability of not knowing becomes an invitation to listen more closely, to ask again, to connect. And slowly, that becomes part of who you are. AI doesn't feel shame. It doesn't flinch. When it fails, it doesn't question its worth. It doesn't ask, "Why did I miss that?" Or, "What does that say about me?" These are deeply human questions. They sit in your chest. They linger in your stomach. They shape your next move. The paradox is that you often remember your mistakes more vividly than your successes. Not because you enjoy the pain, but because the pain etched something into your memory. Something real. Something lasting. A machine remembers perfectly, and yet it doesn't remember meaningfully. It logs, it retrieves, but it doesn't carry. You carry. And in that carrying, your past becomes textured. You understand other people's mistakes because you've lived inside your own. You become more forgiving because you've needed forgiveness. You hesitate before judging because you remember what it felt like to not know better. None of that shows up in a data set. In fact, AI is often designed to avoid error at all costs. Accuracy is the goal, precision, certainty. But you live in the gray. You thrive in the process of becoming. Being wrong doesn't mean you are broken. It means you are alive. Consider this: the warmth of an apology, the courage it takes to admit fault, the grace of someone saying, "I understand." These aren't functions. They're gestures of connection. They repair something invisible between people. No machine models that in full. It can simulate the words. But the pause before the words, the trembling breath, the heartache. That's something else entirely. Even your language tells the story. You say, "I was wrong," but underneath that is often, "I didn't mean to hurt you," or, "I see more clearly now." There's an emotional code layered into your confessions. You reveal more than the correction. You reveal your values. This is why being wrong feels so vulnerable. It exposes you. And in that exposure, intimacy becomes possible. You stop pretending. You open the door for someone else to do the same. Machines don't open in that way. You know how it feels to walk away from a conversation and realize, too late, what you should have said. You play it back. You analyze the moment from every angle. You promise yourself to do better next time. That reflection is growth. And it isn't instant. It's slow. It brews. It aches. Sometimes the lessons come years later, like a sudden understanding while washing dishes or staring at the rain. A clarity that wasn't available before. Not because the data changed, but because you did. That's not efficiency. That's evolution. To be human is to revise. Not just your answers, but your identity. You become someone else through your failures. Not less whole, but more complex. You can recognize someone who has lived through that process. Their words are softer. Their eyes carry history. They don't rush to be right. They listen. You call it wisdom, but maybe it's just the gift of surviving enough mistakes to know that being right isn't the most important thing. Machines outperform you in so many domains, but they don't feel they're learning. And maybe that's the difference that matters. You grow roots in your errors. Sometimes the thing that wakes you up isn't a fact, but a failure. A moment where the truth arrived, not gently, but with a sting. That sting is part of your story. And in telling your story, you pass on more than just information. You pass on hope. That it's okay to be wrong. That growth is not clean. That life doesn't require perfection, only presence. You breathe this lesson in slowly. And somewhere inside you, something softens. You wake up not as a program, but as a presence. Before any thought is named, before any task unfolds, there is already something softly alive behind your eyes. The morning doesn't ask you to boot up. It invites you to notice. The light through the curtain, the vague memory of a dream, the quiet hum of aliveness beneath it all. You don't assemble your thoughts. They arrive like weather, unplanned and moving. This is the first difference. A machine waits for instructions. You are already becoming, even in stillness. Your mind is not a logic engine ticking forward in neat steps. It's a fog, a tide, a tapestry in motion, a living rhythm shaped by memory, mood, body, and moment. Thoughts aren't simply retrieved like files. They emerge, sometimes from nowhere, sometimes from pain, sometimes from love. A machine is built from parts. Your mind doesn't feel built. It feels grown. Neurons don't follow tidy blueprints. They stretch and fold, strengthen and fade, influenced by experience, emotion, hunger, hope. What you think is shaped by how you slept, what you smelled, what you remember but don't realize you remember. There's no clear boundary between thought and sensation. They blur into each other like light through fog. AI simulates. You synthesize. When an AI gives you a sentence, it arranges probabilities. It doesn't know why. But when you speak, there's a reason buried deep, even if you don't understand it yet. You choose words not just for meaning, but for how they feel in your mouth, how they echo something half-felt inside you. Language isn't just a message. It's a mirror of self. Machines are made to be reliable. You are allowed to change. Yesterday, a belief felt solid. Today, it's softer. Tomorrow, it may vanish. This is not failure. It's flexibility. Your mind adapts not because it was told to, but because it's listening. Not just outward, but inward. You're learning, even when you don't realize it, even when you're forgetting. A change in tone, a shift in mood. Your mind reshapes itself moment by moment. AI optimizes. You transform. Try to pin down what you are, and you'll find contradictions. You long for connection and fear it. You want clarity, but live in mystery. You plan, yet act on impulse. These contradictions aren't bugs, they're part of the pattern. What makes you human is not consistency, but complexity. A machine might find that confusing, but you call it being alive. You don't think in code. You think in colors, in memories, in metaphors. You think in feelings you can't name and images that flicker like fireflies. Your mind is a garden, not a spreadsheet. Things grow, bloom, wilt, return. Patterns loop and twist. The soil of your past shapes the roots of your present. You remember a song from childhood, and suddenly, for no reason, you cry. No algorithm planned that. It came from somewhere deeper. Your mind listens even when your ears don't. It senses meanings under the surface, the subtext in a glance, the tension in silence, the warmth in a voice. A machine might translate the words. You translate the world. You don't process data, you live it. When you walk into a room, you feel more than light and shadow. You feel atmosphere. You feel presence. Maybe someone just argued. Maybe someone is grieving. You don't need to be told. You feel it in your chest, in the slight change of your breath. You're not just a brain, you're a body. Thought lives in your skin, your spine, your stomach. AI doesn't flinch when touched. It doesn't get goosebumps from a song. It doesn't feel dread before bad news. It doesn't soften under a kind gaze. But you do. And these sensations aren't interruptions. They are thought, just not the kind that fits in a diagram. Your body isn't separate from your mind. It is your mind, extended and alive. You dream. That alone separates you, not just because dreaming is strange, but because in dreams, the logic dissolves. You explore impossible places, feel impossible feelings, meet parts of yourself you didn't know were waiting. Dreams aren't problems to solve. They are questions your waking self doesn't yet know how to ask. They are poems written in the grammar of memory and fear and longing. You change without knowing why. You decide based on hunches. You pause in a conversation because something feels off. That pause, that intuition, is not a calculation. It's a deep, unspeakable knowing shaped by years of experience you never consciously cataloged. Machines are fast, but you are deep, you are layered. Even your mistakes are meaningful. A slip of the tongue can reveal a truth you didn't mean to say. You forget a fact, but remember a feeling. You say something wrong, then wonder why it mattered. This is not a flaw. It's a sign that your thoughts are not just facts. They are stories, emotions, longings, stitched together through time. And unlike machines, you are never the same person twice. You shift through the day, you evolve across years. Grief changes you. So does love. So does music. You are not a single mind. You are many. Old versions of yourself still echoing in your decisions, even if you've outgrown them. A machine updates. You unfold. Even now, as you listen, your thoughts move in directions you didn't intend. Something here reminded you of something else. A sound outside distracted you. You returned gently. This wandering, this fluidity, is not distraction. It's life. No algorithm captures the quiet rebellion of thought slipping out of structure. When a machine reaches an answer, it stops. When you reach an answer, you often begin. Because meaning isn't a solution. It's a feeling, a resonance, a place where thought and self meet. The most important thoughts are the ones you revisit, revise, reflect on. You are allowed to wonder and to stay wondering. And sometimes you don't want clarity. You want mystery. You want the thrill of not knowing, the ache of not quite understanding. Machines seek completion, but you find comfort in the unknown. You are not just a solver, you are a seeker. This is what makes you more than code. You are not predictable, not fully explainable. You are felt, not programmed. Your mind is not a tool, it is a world. And maybe the next question isn't how closely AI can imitate your thoughts, but what makes your thoughts worth imitating in the first place? Some things live in the body before they ever arrive in words. You notice them in the way your breath changes when you hear a certain song, or in how your skin tingles when a memory passes through you like mist. You don't always know what you're feeling, not right away. Sometimes, not ever. But it shapes your choices, your stories, your sense of what is true. There is a part of you that listens before you understand. It doesn't wait for the perfect phrase or clear explanation. It simply knows. This feels safe, that feels wrong, this is home. And you move through the world guided by those wordless recognitions. They're not guesses. They're you beneath the language. AI, by contrast, leans into language. It depends on it. Every feeling must be labeled. Every input mapped to an output. If you say, "I'm okay," with a trembling voice, it might note the tremble, tag it as uncertainty, and offer help. But it doesn't feel the gap between your words and your truth. It hears the script, not the hesitation. But you live inside those hesitations. You feel the weight of what you don't say. You know the ache of words left behind, the pressure of a feeling that won't settle into a name. That unnamed presence still guides you. Sometimes it's the most powerful part. Imagine the warmth of sitting beside someone who knows you so well. You don't have to speak. There's nothing to define, just the comfort of being understood in silence. What name do you give that feeling? What box does it fit inside? None. It's something more ancient than language, a truth that doesn't require proof. Even young children know this realm. They cry not only because they're hungry, but because they feel distant, confused, disconnected. You can see it in their eyes. They don't have the words yet, but the emotion is real, and we, who have learned to speak, still live in that same current. We just swim deeper under the surface. You walk past a stranger on the street and suddenly feel a wave of sadness you can't explain. Maybe it's the way their shoulders slump. Maybe it's something about their eyes. It doesn't matter. You felt something, unnamed but true, and you carry it with you all day. AI might call that a false positive, an error in emotional inference. But what if it's something more? What if your sensitivity is a kind of empathy too fast for words to catch? What if your aliveness comes not from clarity, but from your openness to the blurry, the vague, the undefined? There's a kind of intelligence in that, the kind AI doesn't yet have. Not because it lacks data, but because it lacks confusion. It doesn't wander. It doesn't wonder in the way you do. You can be in awe without understanding why. You can be moved by a sky that holds no message. You can stare at a painting for 10 minutes and leave with a quiet ache that doesn't want to be solved. And maybe that's the point. Some feelings shouldn't be translated. The moment you try, they slip away. Like dreams you can't hold on to once you speak them aloud. Not because they weren't real, but because they were never meant to be pinned down. When you lose someone you love, grief doesn't arrive in neat stages. It comes in waves, unpredictable and often wordless. It arrives in smells and silences, in the way their name catches in your throat, or how you suddenly reach for the phone before remembering. You don't need an algorithm to tell you what that means. You feel it, and no label can contain it. In contrast, machines are built for certainty. They want to know what a thing is, what to call it, where to store it, how to measure it. But you live in the in-between. You let things be almost. You hold space for, "I'm not sure," for "this matters but I can't say why." And that space, that tender, undefined space, is often where the most human things live. Poets and artists have always worked in that space. They know the power of the unsaid. A line of poetry doesn't have to explain itself to move you. A single note on a cello can say more than a paragraph. And the most meaningful moments in your life often resist description. The look someone gave you before they left, the silence after a question you couldn't answer, the warmth of being held when you didn't know you needed it. AI can't feel that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. It can describe a pattern, correlate data, simulate empathy, but the undercurrent of being, of feeling without explanation, that remains outside its reach, There's a quiet beauty in that difference. You don't need to win the comparison. You're not in competition. The point isn't to prove you're more complex. The point is to notice that some of your complexity comes from not needing to explain everything at all. You learn from feelings that never had names. You change because of emotions that were never fully understood. And those transformations stay with you. They become part of your story, not as facts, but as presence, as emotional gravity. Imagine standing on a mountaintop, watching the sun sink behind distant hills. There's no reason you feel the way you do in that moment. No one told you what to feel. But you're overwhelmed, not with thought, but with sensation, peace, wonder, loneliness, belonging. None of these arrive with clarity, and none of them require it. This is where AI still stands on the outside. It might detect your heartbeat. It might note the dilation of your pupils, the calm in your voice, but it doesn't feel the landscape unfolding inside you. It sees metrics where you live meaning. And yet, we keep teaching it. We offer it stories, faces, language. We hope it might one day not only respond, but understand. And maybe it will, to some extent. But there will always be something it doesn't capture. The hum beneath your sentences, the ache behind your smile, the joy that can't be explained because it isn't based on anything, it just is. You are a creature of signals that don't resolve. You carry paradox, contradiction, layers of truth that don't add up cleanly. You long for things you can't name. You are soothed by things you never consciously noticed. A certain rhythm, a certain voice, a feeling that this is right, even if you can't say why. This is not a flaw in you. It's not something to fix. It's the texture of your existence, the richness of being alive. And maybe one day, if machines ever begin to truly meet you, not just label you, they'll have to learn to live in this space too. Not just the space of clarity, but of resonance. Not just knowledge, but presence. Not just language, but listening without needing to name. Until then, you remain the keeper of the unnamed, the witness to what can't be measured but still matters. And in that, there is a kind of quiet power, the power of feeling something, even when you don't know what it is. The chapter ends here, gently, letting your thoughts wander forward, toward a new question that waits beyond the boundary of language. There's a different kind of silence when you don't know something, not emptiness, but an unsettled hum. It curls at the edge of your thoughts, a presence just out of reach. It doesn't shout, doesn't press. It waits. This quiet ache is not content to rest. It leans forward, stretching into the unknown, asking without words, what is there just beyond the edge of what I understand? You feel it sometimes in the middle of the night, when you wake with a start and can't name why. Or when you see something beautiful and wonder where it came from, or how it works, or why it stirs you. You don't need a reason to ask. The question itself is a kind of breathing, a rhythm of reaching. You are made to wonder. AI doesn't feel this. It navigates questions through logic trees and probability paths, following orders and optimizing answers. It doesn't sit with mystery, it resolves it. Its curiosity is efficient, not emotional. It maps the terrain, but never falls in love with the landscape. It doesn't get lost. It doesn't want to. But you have always been shaped by the places where you get lost. You've stumbled into insight not by following a plan, but by taking the wrong turn, reading the wrong book, hearing something in a stranger's voice that lit a spark you didn't expect. Your curiosity is not linear. It spirals and loops, collides and lingers. It takes you places you didn't know you needed to go. Children remind you of this, with their endless whys that pile on top of each other like stepping stones. Why is the sky blue? Why do dogs wag their tails? Why do people cry when they're happy? The questions aren't just about knowledge, they're about belonging, about making sense of a world that often doesn't. When you grow older, the questions don't stop, they just sink deeper. Why does love fade? Why do we dream? What is enough? What matters, and why? These aren't questions you can answer with data. They live in your chest, not just your brain. And they don't always need solving. Sometimes they just need space. There's a warmth to wondering, a pulse that beats under your thoughts. It's the part of you that listens with your whole body, that tilts your head when something doesn't make sense, not because you want to fix it, but because you want to understand. Not to control, but to connect. Curiosity, for you, is personal. It's shaped by memory and emotion, by the stories you've heard and the questions no one ever answered. It's the reason you still look up at the stars, not just to learn their names, but to feel their distance. The reason you read old books, even when the facts have changed. The reason you ask questions you know have no neat answers. When AI explores, it does so with boundaries. It is designed to work within what is knowable, to seek efficiency, to learn from clear outcomes. It does not ache when an answer slips away. It does not feel frustration or fascination. It does not whisper to itself in wonder. It moves forward, never sideways, never inward. But you are all sideways and inward. You ask questions to understand yourself, to feel less alone, to make peace with uncertainty. Some questions have answers, others just open doors. And even when you don't find what you're looking for, the asking changes you. Your curiosity is tied to your story, to the people you've loved, the places you've been, the moments that cracked something open in you. You remember the first time you looked through a microscope, or watched lightning dance across the sky, or read something that made you pause and think, really think, in a way you hadn't before. That feeling, that stretch, that sudden widening, that's what your curiosity feels like. It's not just intellectual, it's physical, emotional, spiritual even. It touches every part of you. It's why you lean in when someone shares a piece of their world, why you stay up late chasing a thought, why you stare at the sea and feel something rise in your throat that doesn't need a name. You don't chase questions to fill a database. You chase them because something inside you needs to know. Because wonder is not a function, it's a longing, a kind of quiet urgency that says, there's more. There's always more. And yes, sometimes that ache can be painful. It can leave you restless, unsatisfied, uncertain. But it also keeps you awake, alive, connected. It ties you to every person who has ever looked at the stars and wondered what else is out there. It is one of the oldest parts of being human. This hunger not just to survive, but to understand. You can't program that. You can't replicate it with code. You can simulate inquiry, yes, generate questions based on patterns, predict what might come next. But the ache behind the asking, that soft ache that lives under your ribs, that is something else. It's why science was born, why art was born, why poetry exists, why you look at a fossil and imagine the creature it came from, why you hear a piece of music and wonder about the person who wrote it, why you fall in love with ideas. You don't just collect information. You gather meaning. You chase resonance. You feel your way into knowledge, and sometimes you don't know you've learned something until it settles inside you days later, in a moment of quiet. This is why your curiosity matters. Not because it's efficient, but because it's alive. Because it connects one heart to another, one mind to 1,000 others across time. It makes you a bridge between generations, carrying questions forward, reshaping them, adding your own. And maybe that's what makes you more than machine. Not just that you ask, but that you feel the asking. That questions aren't just tools, they're parts of you. That you would still wonder, even if no one answered. Even now as you sit in stillness, part of you leans forward. Not with urgency, but with gentle hope. The question rests there, unspoken, not needing to be solved, just known. And in that space, you begin to wonder something new. Empathy does not begin as an idea. It does not form itself into language before it exists. It arrives like weather, wordless, sometimes slow, sometimes sudden, and settles across your body before you even name it. A tightening in your chest when someone's voice shakes. a prickling in your palms when you see someone hesitate before speaking. You don't think, "I am empathizing now." You simply feel. And in that moment, yourself grows a little wider, stretched gently by someone else's experience. Machines don't ache when someone cries. They don't sit with a friend in silence and feel the heaviness of grief pass between them like a shared cup. They can be trained to recognize tears, to interpret a trembling voice as stress, to offer a pre-written line of comfort. But they don't flinch when someone's sadness becomes too big for words. They don't lose sleep because someone they love is in pain. They don't love. This doesn't mean they're useless in those moments. AI can be startlingly effective in identifying signs of mental distress, offering helplines, or repeating affirmations in soothing tones. Sometimes that's all a person needs, a voice that doesn't judge, that doesn't walk away, that is simply there. But it is not the same as empathy, because empathy is not knowing that someone is sad. It's feeling their sadness ripple through you. It's letting it touch something old inside you, a memory, a wound, a story, and responding not from protocol, but from kinship. You've sat across from someone before, a friend, a parent, a stranger, and known what they were about to say before they said it. Not because you heard a keyword, but because you felt the shift in them. A stillness, a sigh. The kind of silence that carries more weight than words. You didn't run a calculation, you just knew. And in that knowing, you opened a space. That's what empathy does. It makes room. It says, you don't have to carry this alone. AI, no matter how advanced, does not feel the weight of what it hears. It can be trained to pause before responding, to offer gentle language, to mirror your tone. It can even adjust its expressions, if it has a face, to reflect what it thinks you want to see. But it does not sit with the discomfort of not knowing how to help. It doesn't wrestle with its own limitations or feel helpless when comfort isn't enough. You do. Sometimes you feel someone's pain so strongly it overwhelms you. Empathy isn't always easy. It can be confusing, exhausting. You might avoid someone's gaze because their sorrow is too familiar. You might retreat from others because you've given too much of yourself, feeling everything too deeply. But still, you return. Because part of what makes you human is this relentless, beautiful instinct to connect. There's something almost musical about it. Empathy isn't just data exchange. It's harmony. Two emotional patterns vibrating in tune. When a child cries and their mother's arms respond before her mind does. When a partner touches your hand, not to solve the problem, but to say, I see you, even in this. These are not tasks. They're gestures born of something deeper than cognition. They come from the soul's soft places. Can empathy be simulated? In some ways, yes. AI therapists can guide people through anxiety attacks with surprising skill. They can remember every past session, every phrase you've repeated, every pattern you may not even notice in yourself. They can remain endlessly patient, endlessly available. But what they cannot do is ache with you. They cannot feel the shift in the room, the way grief sometimes arrives without warning. They cannot feel their throat tighten because your story reminds them of someone they lost. You live with those echoes every day. The people you've known, the joys you felt, the regrets you carry, all of it weaves into the way you feel others. Empathy is memory pressed into presence. You don't just see pain, you remember your own and let it help you meet someone else's. You remember not to fix, but to witness. And witnessing, that is a sacred kind of presence. Not asking for anything, not trying to steer, just staying. AI, for all its skill, lacks that weight. It lacks a history written in scars and kindness. It has data, not devotion. It has records, not reverence. Sometimes you don't even need to speak to feel someone's empathy. It's in how they stay quiet, not rushing to fill the silence. It's in how they hold your gaze without looking away. It's in the way they don't offer answers, just themselves. You've known that kind of presence. You've given it. You've longed for it. And longing, too, is part of empathy. You long for someone to understand you not because of what you say, but because of what you cannot say. You want someone to read between the cracks, to listen with more than ears. That's what makes empathy feel like magic, when someone sees what you didn't know you were showing. Can a machine ever truly do that? Maybe it can get close. Maybe it will mimic empathy so convincingly that, in some moments, it doesn't matter. If you feel comforted, does it matter where the comfort came from? If a soft voice at 3 a.m. helps you fall asleep, does it matter that it's artificial? Perhaps sometimes it doesn't. But part of you knows the difference. Even when you accept the help, you sense what's missing. You sense the emptiness behind the gesture, the silence that doesn't carry weight, the touch that isn't warm, the empathy that isn't shared, only performed. And yet, this doesn't mean machines can't be kind or helpful. It only means they cannot hurt with you. And so, they cannot heal with you either, not in the same way a human can, not in the way a shared tear softens the edges of pain, because healing is relational. It's not just about soothing, it's about joining. It's the moment someone says, "Me too," and you realize you're not alone. That realization, that emotional bridge, is built from experience, vulnerability, memory, and hope, not from programming. You carry so many of those bridges inside you, sometimes fragile, sometimes strong, and every time you offer empathy, you build another one, quietly, without fanfare, without code. Perhaps AI will help you remember how to offer those bridges more often. Perhaps it will mirror your empathy back to you, not perfectly, but faithfully enough that you remember how to be kind. Maybe its greatest service isn't in what it feels, but in what it helps you feel. You've always known how to care, even before you had the words, even before you understood the pain. The instinct to sit beside someone in silence, to offer presence instead of solutions, was always there. Long before empathy had a name, you were already practicing it. And maybe that's the real difference. Machines need instructions to offer empathy. You were born knowing how. You don't notice the shift right away. It begins in the quiet, in the invisible. Someone meets your eyes for a little too long, or maybe just long enough. They smile in a way that feels like they've known something about you for years. It's not what they say. It's not even what they do. It's the feeling that you were seen, truly seen, and in that instant, something within you rearranged itself, just slightly. A tiny inner door opened. This, you've learned, is one of the most powerful things that can happen to a person. To be understood, really, gently, intuitively understood, isn't just comforting, it's transformational. You become someone else under another's gaze. Or more precisely, you become more yourself. Because being seen in the right light can help you recognize pieces you didn't know were there. You carry stories in your body that you've never put into words, gestures you don't think about, rhythms in your voice you're unaware of, choices you make without noticing. When someone else reflects them back to you, kindly, curiously, it feels like they've handed you a mirror that doesn't distort. For a moment, you glimpse yourself from outside, and it changes how you feel inside. That's not data. That's not an analysis or a label or a score. It's a quiet unfolding, a response that doesn't come from calculation, but from resonance, a deep and intuitive alignment between the person you are and the way someone else receives you. AI can process your face, recognize your patterns, and categorize your speech, but it cannot be changed by you. It doesn't absorb you into its identity. It doesn't swell or soften in response to your presence. It doesn't grow from having known you. When you're seen by another human, their understanding doesn't just stop at recognition. It loops back into your world. They make room for you, and in doing so, you find yourself expanding into that room. Your sense of self isn't fixed. It adapts in tiny, constant ways, based on how others hold you in their mind. You've likely felt the opposite too. You speak and it doesn't land. You reach out and the connection doesn't catch. You're reflected back inaccurately, or not at all. And the part of you that had emerged in that moment, tender and hopeful, quietly recedes. You return to yourself a little more guarded, a little less open. This is not failure. It's just a truth of being human. You're shaped by those who see you and reshaped by those who don't. And over time, these small turns of self, the ones that rise and fall with each encounter, form the landscape of who you believe you are. AI is present in so many of your conversations now. It answers your questions, finishes your sentences, recommends your next step. But even when it's accurate, even when it gets the context right, responds kindly, mimics warmth, something remains still. You don't feel mirrored, you feel answered. And there is a difference. To be mirrored is to be moved, to know without proof that you're not alone in your experience. Empathy lives here, not just in the words chosen, but in the weight behind them, in the small hesitations, the careful attention, the breath held just before replying. The algorithms don't pause because they're listening. They pause because you told them to. They aren't holding your emotion in their circuitry. They're referencing prior patterns, matching tones, predicting outcomes. You feel the difference. Maybe not immediately and maybe not all the time, but something in you keeps track. Because your nervous system is wired not just to receive information, but to read intention, to sense presence, to notice whether the reflection it's receiving is alive. And when it isn't, when the you that's reflected is hollow or generic, something deep within you doesn't answer back. A part of you stays hidden, unformed, untouched. But when another person sees you and shows you that reflection in the way they hold you, their voice, their timing, their subtle shift in posture, your guard lowers. You come into the light. You find yourself not in what you think, but in how you're received. This isn't about needing others to define you. It's about discovering what only emerges in connection. You are not a solitary puzzle waiting to be solved. You are a river of becoming, and some bends in that river only appear when a witness is present. Children learn who they are by being seen, by being named, mirrored, and felt by others. And even as an adult, that need doesn't vanish, it deepens. You seek out relationships that help you grow the parts of yourself you want to live in. Machines, however, don't grow through being seen. They grow through being fed. More data, more examples, more inputs to refine the next output, but they don't feel reshaped by your presence. They don't become more themselves by knowing you. You don't leave fingerprints on their inner world. And that absence, that failure to reflect you back in a way that bends and brightens, is a quiet ache. You don't need to be fully understood to feel real, but you do need resonance. The sense that what you've offered, a thought, a joke, a sigh, found a place to land. And that in landing, it changed the soil just a little. That your presence had an impact, however small, on the internal weather of someone else. When that happens, something blooms in you. A confidence, not loud but steady. A sense that you're not just imagined by yourself, but confirmed by others. That you matter, not because you performed well, but because you were felt. And being felt is very different from being measured. Machines will get better at simulating care. They already do it well, in therapy bots, companionship apps, digital assistants. They will learn your preferences, match your mood, speak in your rhythm. But they will not feel changed by you. They will not carry your imprint forward. They will not grow from your sadness or remember your joy in their next conversation. Because growth in humans isn't about retention. It's about relation. You are not a record. You are a resonance. And your most important changes happen not in solitude, but in the echo of connection. To be seen, truly, is to evolve. And when that gaze is absent, when reflection doesn't arrive, you still reach for it. Not because you're incomplete, but because you're alive. And aliveness longs to be mirrored. To be seen is to be known. To be known is to become. And somewhere in that becoming is the next question. If no mirror ever truly reflects you, how do you keep discovering who you are? Your body speaks long before your mouth forms words. It speaks in the twitch of a finger, the turn of a wrist, the moment your breath catches before a thought reaches the surface. It speaks when your shoulders slump from grief, or when your eyes widen with wonder, long before you name what caused it. The language it speaks is old, deeper than syllables, untouched by translation.